part of the race to the bottom. This is the corporate tax collection, red on this axis, as a share of GNP. And it's gone down from about 5% of GNP paid in corporate taxes in the 1950s to what is now about 1.5% of GNP today. Our biggest companies, everyone's been getting a good education in this with General Electric and others in recent weeks. Our biggest companies pay extraordinarily low taxes, often no taxes at all. And the IRS, in many private deals, has agreed to tax scams effectively, which allow our companies to park all of their international earnings and some of their domestic earnings in tax-free, secretive havens like the Cayman Islands. And Ireland has played a big role in that, actually. Google, for example, has its international headquarters in Ireland. All the profits in Ireland are transferred to the Cayman Islands. A secret deal made by the IRS and Google a few years ago enables Google to use transfer pricing, its internal pricing, so that all the international profits have to pay royalties to a Cayman Island bank account. Those royalties mean that the international operations don't earn profits. All the profits end up in the Caymans. There may not, I don't know if there's a single Google employee in the Caymans, but there is a tax haven there. And Google ends up paying no taxes there. And so this is a system behind the scenes, fully designed with the knowledge and the connivance of the political leadership and the Congress to give a lower and lower tax burden at the top. Now, of course, the Congress and the President are talking about tax holidays, about allowing companies to bring home money parked abroad on a tax-free status, cutting corporate tax rates further, and listen to President Obama. It's the same rhetoric as the Republicans. Both sides are competing for the same money for their campaigns. Now, they need that money because campaigns become more and more expensive. The 2008 election was over $5 billion for the Congress and the President. The one that was just ran now was about $4 billion. And it's anticipated it's going up about 500 million a cycle. So this one could reach more than $6 billion for the 2012 election. That will not come from small donors. Nor did it for Obama, despite all of the publicity about his small donor network. A large, very large proportion of his campaign contributions came from the big boys. And Wall Street was central in helping him to bundle those large contributions. And we saw the implications of that for policy. This is the lobbying expenses. There is no growth industry in the United States like K Street. Lobbying from 1998 has grown from about $1.8 billion a year up to probably about today around $3.5 billion per year. And that's also a way to funnel campaign contributions plus other perquisites so that money speaks. Now, the implications for the U.S. are quite bad. The U.S. has the most corrupted political system of the high-income world in this way, the most money-driven system and the highest inequality. And I think that it is causing a pervasive weakening of the fiber of American society. We're falling behind many, many countries in performance now on many different dimensions. This table shows comparisons of the United States with countries of Northern Europe. Just as an example, the college graduation rate now in the United States is well below that of all of these Northern European countries. Our comparative test scores on these standardized international comparisons called the PISA system are the lowest of these countries. Life expectancy is now 3 or more years lower than in other high-income countries. And of course, for minority groups in the United States, the gap is 10 or 15 years. Obesity rates, another sign of disastrous public health, are basically in full epidemic mode in the United States, unlike the other countries. The U.S. is the only one of these countries with a towering and rising rate of child poverty. We're the only country with a soaring rate of income at the top. You'll note our vacation time compared to the other countries. There is no legalized vacation time in the United States. No guarantees. And a large part of this comes to how our political economy works. We basically have cut taxes and protected the rich and left government chronically exposed with inadequate revenues and with increasing demonization of public services. Now we have a congressional lower house led by the Republicans, very radicalized, out to gut government. But this has been a gradual process for decades. Now it could become a decisive process. We are constantly told how miserably high our taxes are and how they need to be cut. U.S. taxes are 24% of GDP, and you can see that they are somewhere around half of the tax levels of the other countries. This means that our social outlays in the U.S. for health, for education, for income support, for child care, for early childhood development, for other needs are also just about the lowest of all of the high-income countries. Government is missing in action as a result of all of this in the United States. We need major public investments, especially in view of the global challenges, in certain areas. First, to upgrade health, nutrition, and skills of the labor force. The U.S. can't compete unless we are matching or exceeding the college graduation rates in other countries. That can't happen if half the kids are dropping out of high school in many of America's largest cities. That can't happen unless public education is functioning properly. That can't happen if children are growing up in poverty and starting lives in dangerous environments, inadequate nutrition, miserable early conditions. And so the whole panoply of actions of early childhood development, safe environment, proper nutrition, proper community health, public education available, including through tertiary level, training for job skills, more active labor market policies, investing in science and technology, investing in an upgraded infrastructure, protecting the natural environment, providing a social safety net for the poor, and effective regulation. These are all core functions of the public sector. Every one of them is under dire threat in the United States. And there is a de-legitimization taking place that is rampant. And unfortunately, while Paul Ryan represents and he is a front for lots of powerful interests, and he's fronted by Fox News and the Wall Street Journal and others, or propelled by them, President Obama does not defend. He just wants to cut less. And so we have a dynamic here where both parts of the political process do not stand behind this basic agenda. So we've had a tax-cutting mania in the United States really since the 1970s, and a chronic under-provision of public goods and services. This is the tax collection as a share of GDP of all of the high-income countries. Here's the United States at the bottom. Now, and the numbers are a little bit different from the previous chart because it depends on the year, the state of the business cycle, and so forth, without getting into detail. The United States is clearly not an overtaxed society compared to the others. It's the least taxed of all of the high-income countries. If you look at the change of the tax GDP ratio between 1965 and 2010, all countries raised tax rates partly in response to the challenges of globalization. More job training, more science, more income support for the poor, more public education, more investments in health. The United States, however, had the slightest increase of all of the countries. That's how the U.S. ended up with the lowest tax rate share of all of the high-income world. This is not the message you hear day to day. Raise our taxes. Help us expand public goods. Help us address the problems of poverty, lack of education, children growing up in dangerous circumstances, low quality of public education, unaffordable college tuitions. The chronic problems require a public response, but we don't get it in the United States. And the result is that if you compare the level of social expenditures, this is for health, education, retirement, income support, child care, and so on. Add those up as measured as a share of GNP, you can easily find the United States always. We're at the end of the chart. The lowest social outlays of any of the high-income countries. And those chronic problems of inequality, of poverty, of insufficient high school graduation rates, of lower life expectancy, and so forth can all be traced back, in my opinion, to the lack of a social ethos that is reflected in the way we make public investments in this country, or fail to make public investments. And of course, when there's such chronic under-taxation, the budget deficits are chronically high. And now we have an unprecedented peacetime budget deficit in this country of 10% of GDP. This is Ireland, which has had a financial collapse, partly because of its tax haven approach to economics, by the way. Also corrupted and playing games that ended up exploding. But we ended up with a huge deficit, and what are we told? Not to raise taxes. We're told we have to cut spending now. Cut spending that's already the lowest level of all of the countries. So, very quickly, and I know I'm running out of time, what's happening in our current debate? I've tried to estimate what we would actually need to spend at a minimum at the federal level to be able to handle these problems. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other social insurance, the civilian discretionary budget, which includes education, infrastructure, energy, environment, and so forth, military spending, interest payments, and the like. And I come up with a number of at least 24% of national income that would have to be spent by the federal government to meet the basic needs. Now, I'm allowing for military spending to fall by half, for example, as a share of GNP, which means ending the wars and ending a lot of wasteful weapon systems. But taking into account, and I don't have time to go through each of these numbers, preserving the social safety net and making the core investments, even at a most minimum level of what would be needed to address globalization, we would need about 24% of GNP for that. But under our current tax laws, we stand to collect about 18% of GNP. That's the fundamental problem. We're actually collecting this year only 14% of GNP, partly because of the business cycle, but maybe because of the growing disasters of tax havens and loopholes playing their role. So the basic point is we need to spend about 24%. We are actually with a tax system that at best is going to collect about